Guideline 3 describes the importance of providing assessment for group or individual treatments as determined by the service user's specific attachment traits. Links to page 6, second paragraph, the description of the assessment process for the group, which states once referrals were accepted on the programme, informal meetings took place between individual group members and art psychotherapists where the structure was outlined and the format of the liaison between the clinical departments discussed. And the following paragraph connecting to this, which outlines the symptomology of the patients who have been selected, describes, amongst other symptoms, as a symptom requiring group treatment, to quote, whilst each member of the group displayed long-standing relationship difficulties, how these were manifested varied greatly between each member, largely dependent on their current chaotic internal and external states, which was one of the symptoms to be addressed to the group therapy program. Yeah.
We just linked it to both having explicit formulation, a joint service approach, and then assigning those the attachment traits. Okay, in describing a clinical vignette, they state, as the group's gaze transfers from her to her image, we are aware of how her image splits the page, leaving half the sheet unoccupied. A parallel is felt by us with praise being fast forward. Trees that experience the group shift in attention from her to the content of her image, as turning away or as turning out from her. In fact, the group interaction has transferred attention from Teresa's person to her artwork, and this held her within the group's gaze once more. And we are suggesting that this would link to our guideline of promoting art as the central focus of therapy. Also in supporting art as a physical making activity to aid affect regulation and attention control. We're also suggesting that it links to Guideline 7, facilitating joint viewing. Image assumes independence and is available to the viewing mind of the group. We feel that this capacity to access other minds or not is indicative of the difficulties our clients present us with. We would argue here that the artwork has acted as a communicative interface, as mentalizing images between intra and interpersonal relationships that crucially can enable the internalization of this capacity to mentalize. I link this to almost all our clinical guidelines, including 4, 6, 7, and 8. But this is an observation rather than describing what the clinicians have done to facilitate this.
I'm just going to read this again, because I think it is an important point as well, separate to this, what you said, but at the bottom of page 9, where they say, we remark that Chloe's image of her voice seems as fragile as a bubble. It is a use of metaphor. I just want to kind of lay this out, that there is something about, to my mind, that they're thinking metaphorically, not just in a background way, but also in a full-down way. I just think it needs to be thought about in terms of the context of guidelines.
I agree. I wondered if some of that could be linked to Guideline 6 in terms of using the art object to start verbal inquiry focused on the here and now.
Well, yeah, no, in terms of, and I thought also adapting to where the patient is. I think there's got something about, there was something about communication is comprehensible to the service user. Something about that's kind of adaptation as well.
And just continuing down that piece of the vignette, they finish up, we ask the group for responses to our thoughts, which links to that Guideline 8 of the therapist engages in collaborative inquiry.
Yeah, that's right. I like that too.
Yep.
I didn't quite understand the point. Can you really nail it for me about using metaphor?
Yeah. My point is I'm just trying to really work out what the guideline is saying about the complex use of metaphor. So I think that these things are quite complex actually. I'm not just saying symbolically, like this is a bit, let's be very, sort of general. They're actually using metaphors in a very explicit way to describe one person's experience as a bubble, for example. As fragile as a bubble. that's quite a complex notion, and that's quite a mature way of thinking about things. So that's why I'd say there's a degree of complexity there. And in the guidelines it says not to use.
I thought that was her report.
Well, here that's what they say. We
So
remark
we
the
remark
closed image
the
of
closed
her
image.
voice
We
seems as fragile as a bubble.
For the purposes of presentation, we should be noting that we think it's a sort of question about guidelines. We need to note that as
Yeah.
well as.
And I think, to my mind, it might be just that you can't really. When you've got an image, I think it's formed as a much more stable base to begin to do some synchronic work, make just doing verbal workups. And I've seen this in assessments where, I've done a verbal assessment and issues art materials, and there's a very different qualities that kind of, to the use of metaphor, for example. I think it is something to do with introducing images that changes the manner, which isn't in the MBT model.
Yeah.
Could we link what you're saying then to guideline 5, which goes back to the physical making activity to aid affect regulation? And could we maybe wonder, does that then support the use of the metaphor?
No, I don't know. Because under some circumstances, use of metaphor would actually provoke anxiety and.
I'm just wondering because the idea, well, not the idea, the image of the bubbles is in the paper, is on the paper.
Yeah.
And if we think of the concrete art image,
Yeah.
does that allow some, in this instance, safety to use the metaphor? So I agree it's a complex metaphor.
Yeah. But it's something about the representation of mental states, isn't that something in the guidelines too? I think it's more.
Yes.
I think it's more likely to fit into that.
Up in 4.
Just before that, there is something that is very, very long and complicated. We wonder if her anxiety is connected with her feeling of being on the program. So somebody is telling her already about a conjecture, with her feeling of being on the program, and whether she can trust the therapy to end. Or will it replicate previous failure or basic trust? This is transference. This is something that, as far as MBT, let alone our guideline, is completely outlawed. I mean, what I mean is, this is not something that I would say is kosher MBT.
Something if it's verbalised, though, if it's
Yeah, no, exactly. That's not much ambiguity. This thing we wonder if her anxiety is best with
if
it.
it wandered with her, then we know.
Just whether it's that reflection through writing the paper, which to me it suggests why it's so difficult to actually find in the paper things that the therapist actually does, because there's that fear that it will be then seen as sort of right or wrong.
I think generally, when I write, I don't generally listen in process notes. So if I write about an experience, it's translated in theory, I think, or it's translated into an impression of what happened. Yeah. Generally not translating what I literally say. I just don't think I'm not in the habit of doing that, I think.
Yeah. It would be quite arduous as well, I suppose. But I do wonder in terms of papers, that it does. They operate at a kind of theory level rather than finding it down to practical. We said this at this time.
Yeah.
There are moments there, but I suppose I just want to pick up those moments where they do say we remark that.
Yeah.
But is the task to corroborate the guidelines, or is the task to find a way of perfecting the guidelines, whether they are being supported in the practice or contradicted in the practice, so as to make the guidelines fit for accreditation?
Yeah, that's the purpose of
And therefore, it may also be important to find the contradictions in the practice, because then we can perfect the guidelines, which is going to give them more chances of being accredited. And in the process, we will show that we found and picked holes and corrected them.
Yeah.
Which is going to...
As long as we bear in mind that the paper doesn't make it absolutely clear that this is what was remarked in the group. It's a remark in the paper, a reflection in the paper. So we don't know.
But it may be that the guidelines is fine, this is contradicting. The practice sometimes contradicts the guidelines. That doesn't. It may be that the practice that has to be perfected, not the guidelines.
Yeah.
But we need to. This is part of the process. of us comparing, isn't it? Because we are.
I like to think it's
So,
statements.
can I just, the point that it seems to contradict is that use of complex metaphor. Okay, so
Can we, and I would say, transference interpretation, go on.
Yeah, that's fine.
transference interpretation.
But possibly that
Yeah.
might be, it's not explicit whether they made a transference interpretation. It says,
Well, for instance, there's one here, along the same lines where we once allowed about Sam's envy of us, when she admitted to the envy she felt for people who perceived her as sexual.
there's a sort of mini transference interpretation.
Yes, that's on
It's
page 10.
there, the mini one.
Yes.
The Mickey Mouse one.
Is that?
The guideline doesn't say you shouldn't make. What are we saying?
Are we saying we shouldn't?
Well, isn't this rest? Because does it contradict a mentalising model?
But it depends if you're talking about MBT or mentalising model.
Yeah, an MBT model, I suppose, because they were working in an MBT model.
It contradicts an MBT model. In the first section, it's highly unlikely that you produce this. Yeah, I mean, I think they produce an MBT model.
Not in the first.
Certainly not the first section, though.
Not in the first section. Yeah.
But is it enough for us just to say that the paper seems to bring into question the guideline that states that therapists should avoid complex interpretation, complex use of metaphor or interpretation.
Yeah.
Whether we don't actually have to.
But we can pick bits out of there to substantiate that.
What I suppose I was trying to. Is it a hole in the guidelines, or do we stand by the guidelines and we think it's a hole in the paper?
Well, I
I
think
need to acknowledge it at this stage.
we just need to acknowledge it, yeah.
There may be a discrepancy between the content of the paper on this one
Yeah.
and the guidelines.
Yeah.
This needs to be reviewed.
At this point, we're not going to change the guidelines because of it, but we've got to notice it.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And to show
And
that
it
we've
may-
noticed
yeah.
it, yeah.
Sorry. And it may be that a level of complexity that is not manageable or tolerable in purely verbal therapy may actually be tolerable and manageable and absorbable in arts psychotherapy. That is a point of research. We don't know. I think that is
And I
true.
think it is.
That's what I do.
It comes back to the physical.
I thought actually it was sort of good stuff. So.
I think we can do stuff.
Yeah.
I think our therapy reaches past the other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, no, I think, but I think
it's more tolerant.
the image
Yeah.
makes metaphor more manageable for these clients. And I think it is
Right.
the physical making on the paper that actually then takes some of the fear of the metaphor. And they don't get as lost in the
That's
metaphor.
right.
And also, it's not the expert therapist saying, you feel like X, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'm being superficial, but,
No, it's
because
true.
they've done it.
That's
They've
right.
put it on the
Absolutely.
paper.
That
and
is
that
the whole
allows them
point.
to enter the metaphor
They
differently.
put it there, and you are holding the mirror. Now, how you actually hold the mirror may be a point of technique.
Yes.
You don't want to sort of crash them with it and bang their nose again, rub their nose in it.
Yeah.
But you can say, there is that. I can see that. Does anybody else see that?
I think, can I just throw another stunner in the works?
Yeah.
I wonder whether there's a difference between simile and metaphor. That talking about being fragile as a bubble is, I think, fits within the mentalisation-based therapy model because it's an effect focus. And if it's sort of understood by the patient quite simply, I think that's perfectly within.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a feeling that they were saying that not in pretend or psychic equivalence, then you may well feel that they are in connecting with their affective state.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Brings it back into.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, I think it's